Welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge podcast, brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter. This morning, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Bryan Scott. Bryan, thank you so much for giving up some of your time this very sunny Thursday morning for joining us.
Yeah, I mean, the sunshine's incredible, so that definitely helps make this a lot nicer and an even better experience than I hope.
Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. Now, Bryan, we've got 20 minutes or so to introduce our listeners and viewers who aren't aware of you and your background to kind of get a flavor of who you are and what you've done so far in your career and kind of your aims and motivations for the rest of it. So let's start with kind of those formative experiences that have kind of helped shape, your view of the world. Start wherever you like. Some guests go back to literally, early childhood, others start a little bit later. But yeah, just give our listeners a flavor of you.
Yeah, I used to run the marketing for a headhunting company within the media and advertising world. And one of the questions the CEO and founder of that business would always ask people is, tell me about your childhood. Tell me what your parents did, all that kind of stuff. And I guess in light of the conversation we're going to have and we're on the Responsible Edge podcast, I think if I was to think back to my formative years and how my behaviors were kind of shaped, a lot of that came from my mum. My mum was a policewoman. She was one of the youngest kind of graduate, kind of early kind of apprentice style policewomen to go into service in Scotland. I think she went into the academy when she was 18. So this is 50 odd years ago, and latterly became a justice of the peace, like a kind of a district court judge. So I think from as I was growing up, the idea that you had to be good at something was important, but also the idea that you had to do things properly was equally important. And there was a right way about doing things and morals and ethics, even though I probably didn't really know what the words meant. I think there was always an element that was drummed into me, my brother, and my sister, that actually the way that you treat people, the way that you yourself operate is really as important as the skills and whatever else you might have. So that, I think, from formative years, that was really important. I think that has led to a number of different things. One, from a personal perspective, when I work with people or work in organizations, I want to make sure that we are doing things right. I think there are intuitively right ways of doing things. You might say that that's responsible, but I think that there's just things that feel like they're proper. And then the other side to it is in terms of partnerships and the way that you work with others. I worked for Metro, the free newspaper, a while, and we were a partner for a big festival called Advertising Week Europe. And some things went wrong in the first year of that, largely down to things that happened within my team and within our jurisdiction. And I remember having the conversations with the different partners that had a knock-on effect as a result of that. And the number one thing everyone talked about was that partnerships are partnerships. And actually, if you go into them with your eyes open and your arms open, then you're much more likely to get better results. So I think having the back of your team, of other people as well, is really, really important. And I it was one of the things I always found a bit difficult when I joined the advertising media industry. I started off on the agency side as a kind of planner buyer. I wasn't really cut out for negotiation. I found it really difficult to understand that anyone might want to try and get the upper hand, and that actually surely the best way is that you have something that's mutually beneficial. I think that's what I try to bring to the party when I have conversations with partners now, which is we're quite clear in terms of what we want to achieve. How can they help us deliver that? And I think that's really, really important in terms of that journey that happens throughout the years. It's definitely been a way that I've thought about things.
And it's really interesting because you can just see how your experience and your influence of your mother, and being clear, being upfront, being equitable in terms of your approach to things is obviously been ingrained from the start. Equally, your mother was a bit of a trailblazer. She was the first woman to find herself in this position.
I think there were four of them, yeah.
Okay, but she was one of the first. Like, how did that? Just talk us through. You mentioned you went into media buying and negotiation, which perhaps wasn't your area. But what was your kind of key areas of focus throughout the sort of rest of your education and into the early part of your career? Like, what were you drawn to? What were your skill sets that you kind of that you became aware of that you wanted to sort of work on?
So I guess if I went back to my school days, and it's probably fair to say that I was quite academically bright. And I think, but looking back on that, I think academically bright basically means you can learn a lot of things and that you're capable of understanding and interpreting them and playing them back to people. That's it. That's obviously quite a good skill to have in the comms and marketing sector. So maybe that was quite formative in terms of how I got into this business. I think where my heart lay was mostly in the kind of art types side of things. I would love to have been some kind of designer or artist or videographer. We didn't really have those back in my younger years, but something like that was a bit more creative. But I didn't necessarily have the capability or I didn't feel like I was good enough at that to warrant that to be my focus for life. Where I was quite good was on the more academic things, so like maths and accountancy and economics. So when I went to university, I studied accountancy largely, and I was on the cusp of kind of going on getting a job for one of the big 6 accountancy firms, and I got down to the last interview. This was in my 3rd year of university, so I still had another year to go. So they were prospecting for the year after. And my final interview was with the HR director of one of the big 6 at the time accountancy firms. And she said, on paper, you've got this. She went, but do you really want to be an accountant? And I went, no. She went, well, are you sure? And I went, I'm not sure, to be honest. And she said, Neil, maybe take this year to think about it. She went, you can get a job doing this. But she went, maybe have a think about what you really want to do, because she went, what we're looking for is someone that's passionate about the work that we do. So I went away from that and actually changed my final year of my degree, which in Scotland you do an honours degree, which the final year you can leave after 3 years and you have a standard degree. So I could have had a BA, but then to do your honours, you have to do the 4th year. And I stayed on to do that, and I just focused on marketing because I realised that was probably edging me more towards the more creative, more kind of thoughtful process that I quite enjoyed. So that was kind of how that happened. The rest kind of happened by accident. I was working part-time in McDonald's, got a phone call one day in my final year just before we had our exam results, asked me if I wanted to come down to London for an interview with an advertising agency called Leo Burnett's. Got there, didn't know anything about the world of media planning, which was what the job was. But I did know a lot about McDonald's. And it just so happened that the client that they wanted us to work on was McDonald's.
Oh, wow.
Which was great. I mean, there's a whole story there. I basically got my job because of ice cream cones and being able to tell a story about seeing old people buy ice cream cones in McDonald's because it didn't hurt their teeth. But that's a whole other story. Come back if you want to hear that one later. But yeah, I ended up getting that job, and that to me was the journey that got me out of Scotland down to London. The really interesting thing about it, I mean, I'm sure everyone's got views about McDonald's. I still love it. They talk about having ketchup in your veins when you work there, and I think I worked in store for 5 years, and I met some of my best friends in the world during those years, and I still see them, still keep in touch. When I go back to my mum's, I'm out with them all the time. So it was incredible. Bear in mind, this is 30 odd years ago. It's a long, long time.
Amazing.
But also that job, going back to the things that doing things right, I felt like when I was in that job, I was treated as an equal by the McDonald's team as a service provider. We were their agency, so we were ultimately providing them a service. But they treated us as equals. We were seen as part of their team. We weren't necessarily seen as someone that they could dump work on. And again, that to me became a real guiding light for the way that I wanted to work. I remember leaving that job. I did that job for two and a half years, and then went to another agency working on some amazing brands, like the kind of stuff that as a 25-year-old, you would want to work on, like PlayStation and all that kind of stuff. And I just didn't feel the same connection to the businesses that I was working with. And it wasn't necessarily about the products. It wasn't necessarily about the services. It was about the way that the interface happened between myself and the client, or myself and the teams that I was working with. And that was kind of a bit of a change in me, where I said, I want to move more into the marketing roles. I want to be more in control of some of those conversations that we can have with our partners and try and make them feel like they're we're equals, we're partners, and the way that we do things is not about one-upmanship. Not that it felt like that, but it was more. It just was. I just wanted to be part of their team. I wanted to be the person that's helping them to meet their goals, rather than someone who you're getting called in to do this little bit. And genuinely, when we were working on the McDonald's account, it never felt like that, but it did with some of these other brands. You're kind of at the bottom of the funnel rather than close to the top. So yeah, that became my move into marketing. And I've been doing that for the last 20 years, largely for media businesses. So started off in radio, working for Capital Radio back in the day before it became global. I've worked in out of home for a company called PrimeSite, which ironically was later bought by Global. I worked in publishing. I worked for DMGT. I ran a kind of creative agency that sat across all the businesses that DMGT owned. And the latter 2 years in that business, I was there for 7 years. I was the marketing director at Metro, which was an amazing job. I mean, that was during the 2012 Olympics. You can imagine a paper that's so synonymous with cities across the country, but very strong heritage in London. We were a massive part of the Olympic celebration. So that was incredible. But one of the things that, again, I was thinking about this just before we came on the podcast. How do you see your own ways of working manifesting itself? And I remember a process we went through at Metro to find a new creative partner, a new agency to work with us to help us develop some of the messaging that we want to put out there. And normally, just in case anyone doesn't know how that would work, normally you'd call in a whole bunch of people to come and pitch to you. You'd call them in and you'd say, oh, we want you to come in with some ideas, how you might do that, blah, blah, blah. I'd been party to that in my previous jobs. And I remember thinking that's a lot of work to ask people, 4 or 5 people, when you might only choose one of them. Well, you would only choose one of them. You're basically making them pitch against each other. So we followed a framework that was created by the Advertising Association, IPA, and ISBA, which was all about responsible briefing. And we were kind of one of the first organizations back then to kind of see it through to completion. And the whole idea was that we would meet with some agencies. So we had some exploratory meetings, get to meet the teams that we could be working with. And then based on the chemistry that we had in there, the way that we felt and what we felt about the work that they showed us for their other clients and the thinking behind it, we then, rather than going through a pitch, we got the agency that we thought was probably most akin to what we wanted into a room, had a bit of a half-day brainstorm with them. They didn't have to prepare anything, but we just were talking about our business challenges. And off the back of that, we made the decision to hire them. So from their perspective, they didn't have to spend weeks and weeks preparing a big pitch and some work that might never get used or might never get referenced. And for me, that felt like we were getting value and they were getting value as well.
And it comes back brilliantly described, right? And really interesting. And it brings us back to that kind of theme throughout the way that you described your upbringing and the early formative part of your career, that for you, it's all about the respect that you can show to the partners and the colleagues that you're working with, and to make sure that there's an awareness of what you're asking from others, and being prepared to view one another on an equal footing, which very much comes across in what you've described so far. I've got so many questions I really do feel like we could have like a whole show on you and your background, but just talk us through. So from Metro, you then have joined Ozone. Just if I'm right in getting the timeline right,
there was a couple of ones in between, but
okay, there's the ones in between. Just fill us in with kind of Metro onwards to where you are now.
So Metro, I left here 2013. I spent some time working for a little digital advertising startup for a year and a half. That kind of wasn't going the way that I wanted it to, so I made a decision to leave there. I was going to take some time out, but then a friend of mine who runs the headhunting company asked me if I would do some contracting work. 3 months turned into 3 years, working with some great people there. We did a lot of fun things. We did a lot of stuff that actually in all of my jobs I would love to have still been doing, but as you got more senior, that kind of got taken away from you. So we did lots of charity work. We launched a industry-wide quiz, and we raised about 50 grand for Childline across 3 years, which was incredible. Awesome. And then I moved from there to PrimeSite, which was out of home company again. So the interesting thing with this was I chose that job, not based on what I was going to be doing, but the people that I was going to be work with, the principles and the ethos of the business. Like, they were very values driven. And that's why I decided to join them. Ironically, though, literally a month or two after, probably not even a month after I joined, they were bought by Global, and then my role was made redundant at the back of that. So that was 7 years ago, nearly. I then got asked if I would interview for my current job at Ozone. I was like, nah, I want to take some time out. I was convinced to go and have a conversation with Damon, who's our CEO, and we had a very honest conversation about having worked in publishing, what our business, so we're a digital advertising platform business, slightly different from most others in that we're owned by 4 of the biggest UK publishers, so The Guardian, Telegraph, Reach, and News UK. And he said basically the danger is that we are seeing so much money getting pulled out of publishing into the big platforms, so the Metas of the world, the Googles of the world, that actually it can create an existential threat for publishing. That to me was that's a business with purpose. That's a business that's got a reason for being. So I decided in my head, I didn't tell Damon this, but I decided in my head, why don't I try it for 6 months, see if I like it? And if not, I've still got some cash in my back pocket. I can go and take some time out. That was 7 years ago. 7 years ago this year. Oh, sorry, 6 years ago this year. So, it's been a journey, and it's been quite an incredible journey. And as I say, working for a business that genuinely has principles. Everything that we do arcs back to what we were just talking about there. All of our products, all of our features, all of the things that we talk to our customers about, all come back to, can we help maintain a better journalistic ecosystem for the future?
And does that, Bryan, how does that impact? I mean, you've spoken about your childhood experiences, your inspiration of your mum and the way that she sort of influenced you. What's it like for you working for an organization and working in a role whereby the values and the principles are so clear, so evident, and so strong? Like, what does it do for you from a satisfaction perspective?
I think where it's probably most noticeable is that, and I'm sure most people I talk to nowadays are in the same boat, which is they've never been busier, they've never had more to do, they've never had so much pressure on them to meet their goals. That's all well and good, but actually to then go, when I'm doing all this and the pressure is on, that it has a bigger societal impact, arguably down the road, is a bit that kind of makes you go, okay, this is worth doing. This is not just lining shareholder pockets. This is not just about the cash. This is genuinely about the future of a sector that I care a lot about. We'll talk about this obviously in a little bit, but I think that it's really, really important that people's voices can get heard. I don't think we should be censoring people's voices. I think that it's really important that communities have a say. And obviously, I'm a big believer in we shouldn't have hate speech, but we can still have opinion. And there's a fine balance between the two. But obviously, you need to have outlets that kind of help guide and shape some of that thinking. And without that, we're relying on who has the loudest voice out there. And what we're seeing in the world today, I think, is we've got a lot of people talking who've got no filter on them. They've got no moderation. There's no one telling them that you can't say that because it's actually not factually true. And I think that's danger. So when I'm working and I'm thinking about all the pressures that are up on me, then all that stuff comes to fore. The flip side of it, the other good thing is when we're hiring people and we've been growing. I joined, I was employee number 19. We're now probably about 140 people and probably about another 25 joining this year. The ability to be able to say this is what we're about, you get people that definitely lean into that. And actually when I'm hiring personally, I'm looking for people that are going, yeah, I can see that and I can see why I want to be part of what they're doing.
And Bryan, brilliant to hear the growth and development of Ozone. And we'll, by the way, we'll be linking to Bryan's LinkedIn profile and to Ozone, the Ozone website, etc. So our listeners and viewers can go and check things out themselves. But very much aligned with your response there to thinking about that kind of the purpose, if you like, that you feel within your current role, allowing you to sort of break through the the borders, if you like, of things being difficult, things being challenging, things being, being busy, if you like, and being stretched, if you like. When you think about the rest of your career now, and you think about what success would look like, what comes to mind? Like, what would success of the rest of your career entail?
I'm of the age now, Charlie, where I'm thinking about retirement, genuinely thinking, how do I get to a point where I retire earlier than I might want to, so that I might be capable of, so that I can enjoy the world. That's genuinely my thing. But I think, to answer your question in all seriousness, it has the ability to understand in my own head that this stuff is really important, has made me look for it in other jobs. So as I say, when I was at PrimeSite, that values-driven business was the number one driver in me taking the job at Ozone, because I realized how much it made me happier to be part of that organization. So if, for example, if I found myself looking for another role, I would definitely have the business culture, the business purpose at the heart of it. And I know those are things that a lot of people talk about. You have to scratch below the surface to actually find out what that looks like, I think. We have company values. And if you came for an interview in my team, we'd probably talk through those values. There's every possibility you might think, oh, there's a whole load of coswallop that someone's put together, and especially coming from the CMO of the business, that's just some words. But we didn't. We genuinely got the whole, at the time, we got the team in a room together and said, we've got something special here. What is it that makes Ozone special? And there was about 9 or 10 people in that session, none of the leadership team, just people that were part of the broadest team possible. And they debated every single word of our values. They did it with an external facilitator so that they didn't take about 4 weeks to do it. So we had quite a tight deadline to kind of articulate what this was. And that was 5 years ago. And those values are still guiding what we do as a business today. And they don't, every time we look at them, we go, should we update them? They don't feel like they need updating. And I think that's because they're genuine, and that we now have a business where people have that at their heart. So that's what I would be looking for if I wasn't here and I was going somewhere else.
I love that. But Bryan, the term, and is overused, but authenticity comes to mind. The fact that those values can be sustained for that period of time and not have to change, and be so, as I say, genuinely and naturally, manifested in the organization and in the people that are working there. I think that's such an interesting message. Bryan, brilliantly, as you can see from the timings, we've raffled through our 20 minutes, and with my producer's words ringing in my ears, they like me to stick to timings a little bit more closely. Let's move forward now, if possible. As I mentioned, we'll obviously link to your profile and on LinkedIn, so people can go and check out all the various different things that we haven't been able to cover. But would you mind now just providing a bit of an overview and a summary of, I think that it was a Financial Times piece from October last year. Would you mind just introducing that piece to our listeners, our viewers, and then perhaps picking out for you whatever the most interesting points that were made in it?
Yeah, of course. So the article that Charlie shared with me, which is something that's really close to the heart of our business. So it was actually a really nice one to be able to kind of look at and go, I've got a point of view in this, as has our business. So it was the title of it was News Publishers and Broadcasters Warn Over Advertising Blacklists. And the article was largely referring to an initiative that was launched by the marketing group Stagwell, US-based marketing group, called The Future of News. And this is a global program that's really focused on getting marketeers to reappraise their investment in news publishing and content. What we have been seeing is less spend coming into news publishing. And that has what at Ozone we've always called the flywheel effect, what Stagwell referred to in their stuff as a virtuous cycle, which is if you have more investment into news, you have the ability to invest in better content. That better content leads to more engagement from readers. That more engagement leads to better response to advertising, which leads to more investment, and the cycle continues and continues. We've been talking about that since Ozone was born. So as you can imagine, we are very close partners with Stagwell on this research, so we know quite a lot about it. But at the heart of this, the piece that was kind of shared in October was the subject of block lists. And block lists are a way for the advertisers use to avoid being positioned against what might be deemed as unsafe content in news or across the open web, actually, so across the websites at large. That might mean if you are, like on your block list might be the word crash, because you don't want to be beside air crashes or car crashes. That kind of stuff kind of makes sense. Now, the flip side of that is in certain parts of the web, particularly those that are editorially governed and have editors in charge of what content is placed, we would see them kind of saying, actually, we're not going to run any advertising on that because it's not the kind of environment that we're going to place ads in. But these tools still come into play. And what we've found is that some of these very blunt tools therefore then can't differentiate between the semantics of a word. So shoot with a gun has a very different meaning to shoot at a goal, football match. A lot of these tools are quite blunt, and we'll look at both and say, actually, we can't, an advertiser as a technology layer can't run against those. The challenge with a lot of these things is that many of the block lists are poorly maintained and not updated. Yeah. So Reach, who are one of our shareholders, they have a business called Mantis who work in this space with all around the kind of the block listing thing. And a piece of work that they did pointed to the Olympics last year, obviously in Paris, and a lot of content being blocked because the block list still had the word Paris in it from the Paris attacks, I think 7 or 8 years prior to that.
Oh, wow.
So what you're getting is the compound impact of things that were designed to create safety for advertisers, actually reducing their audience potential, and therefore also reducing investment into news publishing. So
because I'm sorry, Brian, just to interrupt, but just for my thing, so because of it pulling sort of away from the flywheel, the virtuous circle that you described before, ultimately there's less opportunity for advertisers to be positioned in relation to these content pieces that feature these words, etc.
Absolutely, and I think there's two sides to it. One is there's the bit that in the article itself, Stagwell, Mark Penn, who is the founder of Stagwell, talked a lot about actually advertisers not invest in news, but they might invest in sport and entertainment content. Across our platform, we talk about the act of consumers coming to be informed, inspired, and entertained. That is what journalism. That is what newspapers, magazines, websites. TV websites. All the kind of content-rich, audience-first platforms. So people that have kind of gone, actually, we want to attract an audience. How do we get stuff out to them? They have all been designed to kind of engage people. You would think that if people aren't going to advertise in news, that money might go elsewhere. But the challenge is, and I think this is broader than what the article alludes to, is that if you have a challenge in getting money away in news, and if you're thinking about publishing, particularly if you think about newspaper publishing, the number one thing you're going to think of is the news content. They've got tons of content. It's about, it could be informing, it could be recipes, it could be lifestyle content, it could be fashion, it could be sport. They got all this content in there. And I don't think necessarily that the advertising money shifts out of news and goes into those places. I think what happens is the advertisers go, that's too much of an issue. It's too much of a challenge to have to deal with that. I'll invest somewhere else. And if you only need to look at numbers to see where, particularly in digital, advertiser budgets are getting spent. They're getting spent in the big platforms. So they're getting spent with Meta, they're getting spent with Google, they're getting spent with TikTok. That's where a lot of the funds are flowing to. I was going to say, we've seen a lot of stuff in the news of late, haven't we, around Meta's decisions to stop some of that human moderation of their content. Yeah. This article, Blocklist, is all about brand safety. I would die in a ditch to tell you that I think that any news or magazine brand that has an editorial governance policy that has regulation. If you think about it, Ipso as a regulator looking over what these publishers produce, they've got a right to reply. I mean, you don't like something, you can write to the editor. They have to provide corrections if they do something factually wrong. On this governed part where block lists are getting set up to stop advertisers coming against content that they might not want to be against. Compare that to the platforms, and they're rolling back on human moderation. They're letting machines do a lot of that, and they don't have any of that regulation. They don't have any of that capability to say what is getting said here is the truth. And I just think that there's a slightly kind of off balance measure in all of that, which is the platforms tend to get the investments flowing into there, yet the news and magazine side of the better end of the internet, where all this great content lives, great editorial governed content lives, is being penalized. If you think about the internet as a whole, they need those guardrails, because there is a ton. The long tail of the internet is huge, and we've all seen someone's blog where they're ranting about the latest conspiracy theory or something like that. That does probably need advertising regulation, block lists and that kind of stuff to keep advertisers safe. We've been trying to, at Ozone, we've been trying to talk about what we call the premium web. So the better end of the internet, where stuff is governed, where we have editorial oversight, where people are actually coming to be entertained, informed, and inspired, where it's not websites that are made for advertising. Because a lot of the long tail is stuff that we've all been down those clickbait holes, haven't we? Where you see a man who's dug a hole at the bottom of his garden, and you click to see that there was nothing there in the first place. But what you have done is you serve 20, 30 ads in that time. Advertisers paying for that. Some website out there is getting money and they're just making loads of cash out of it.
And just you've shared so many fascinating insights there, Bryan, but I'm just going to pick out one. You mentioned the premium web. Would you sort of advocate for the block lists not applying at all within the context of the premium web? Or do you think you mentioned earlier that these block lists and the technologies that we use in order to determine them just need to become more sophisticated and more nuanced? Like, where does your position sit on that?
I mean, my personal view is that they shouldn't have to exist in the premium web. I mean, there are editorial checks on every single publisher that we work with. So if you think about our platform, we handpick those publishers. In the wider world of digital advertising, people can just chuck out ads wherever they want. Ours are handpicked, and one of the number one kind of key partnership principles that we have with anyone that we onboard onto our platform is all around that kind of editorial governance and the audience first thing. So do you have someone that's checking to make sure things are right? So we would not work with, say, and I've seen these come through our website inbox asking to be a publisher partner of Ozone's, and you look at their content and not a single article has got anyone's name against it. So they're written for advertising purposes rather than for the reader purpose at the end of the day, or for consumers generally. So I don't think there is any need for it. We are actually, I haven't actually told you this, but we are working with one of our agency partners called Bountiful Cow, who are actually doing some research into this right now. So they are doing a piece of work which they have run some campaigns for some of their clients with brand safety tools applied and without. And the results of that, I don't actually have the results yet, but they're coming out at the beginning of May. And I'm pretty sure that those will point to that there is no impact in advertising effectiveness or anything like that for the brands that were involved. I think one of the big things that advertisers worry about is if you're against, and I think this is, you can warrant this, you can understand where it might come from. If you're against negative news, then your brand is going to be perceived negatively as well. And this is kind of the crux of the work that Stagwell did. So they did 50,000 odd people in the US and 22,000 in the UK. And they basically went to them and they showed lots of ads in lots of different places. And the whole idea was to see if the content that they were sat against, whether it had any impact on people's purchase intent, on how they favor a brand, or what they think of that brand's image. And the results basically said there was nothing. There was no difference at all.
Oh, wow.
So the argument that just because you're beside a story that might be about the negative impact of Trump's tariffs that are happening just now, probably just aged your podcast, Charlie. Yes, I'm sure they might still be going for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I bet they would. Just for anyone's reference, we are recording on the 10th of April, 25.
Yeah.
Do carry on, Brian.
But that might be deemed as some as negative news that they might not want to be against. But that story, people are clever enough. The consumers are smart enough to go, just because there's an ad for X advertiser there doesn't mean they're endorsing or kind of the other way about kind of the tariffs. The two are separate. And I think people are smart enough to get that. And that's what all these studies are really kind of pointing to.
And Brian, it's super interesting, and that's incredibly comforting to know that there can be this degree of disassociation going on in terms of the readers or the user's experience. I want to ask you kind of a bigger question about like this trend that you've seen or that you've observed, and the article alludes to, like if we don't find ways to resolve these issues and protect what you've determined as the premium web and quality journalism and quality publishing, like what impact does that have, not just on the industry, but potentially on society at large? Have you had yourself sort of reflecting on that?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about in our business. So if I take a step back, actually, if you think about some of the stuff that some of the big news publishers that I'll use them as some examples of doing to try and kind of make sure that they have enough funds to power the journalism. Ultimately, that's what they do. That's what they do. They want advertising money to help fund the content that they create so that consumers can get access to it. At Ozone, we talk a lot about kind of making sure that we power the free information economy so that you don't have people that have access to content and others that don't have access. You can understand as a publisher, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. So we've seen a lot of experimentation of different types of funding models. So obviously the Times and the Telegraph they have kind of subscriber bases. So they have content that is available to subscribers and both building really successful business out of that. We've seen some of the ones that have titles that have got broader reach kind of create partly kind of subscriber content, mostly free content. So the ones I can think of off the top of my head, the Sun Club and Mail Plus. So those titles kind of have certain content. Largely they're big columnists and maybe some exclusives that sit behind a fairly inexpensive subscription model, maybe a couple of quid a month. And then you've got someone like The Guardian who's got their reader donations and subscription model as well, which has been really successful for them. So people that believe that we need a voice that is going to stick up and can continue to do that great investigative journalism they do. There's a lot of people out there that are contributing to that. So if you have all that going on, at Ozone, we look at this and say our job is to make sure that we contribute to that through advertising. And I'll go back to that point, which is if we don't and we're not successful, then money will just flow elsewhere. The biggest challenge comes in effectiveness. We as a business have acknowledged our number one challenge over the next few years is to be able to demonstrate to all these advertisers who might have kind of invested a lot of money in social and technology platforms that actually there's just as much value in advertising across the premium web, so across the premium end of the internet. And we got a whole new story that we're just about to launch to the market talking about this, around the fact that actually when you've got someone reading a news brand or a magazine brand or playing a puzzle, it doesn't really matter, but they're engaged in real content. These are real life humans that are seeking out that content and actually spending time with it. We can deliver that at scale. We've got loads of technology in the back end that helps do that. And we're really focused on making great creative to do that. That is a big journey, but the upshot of that, the thing that we really want to make sure that we do is deliver results for advertisers so that they continue to invest in this category. we really worry about the idea of not having a market that or a sector that challenges and that informs and entertains and people, and that's across every type of thing. So it doesn't actually matter. I have people sometimes say to me, "Oh, you talk about the premium web, and some of your titles might be more premium than others," and I say, "Yeah, but that's you're basing that on your own opinion." So people quite often will term the qualities, because I think of the old days of tabloids and broadsheets. I am a massive lover of quick, easy to understand content. That is difficult stuff to do. When I worked on Metro, the editorial team there, you would think their job was really easy because you just have to write a couple of paragraphs. That can sometimes be harder to do than write a 800-word piece in long form. So the fact is, we have to make sure that we are delivering free information to anyone that kind of that has any kind of political leaning, social leaning. So, I mean, all our publishers have very different audiences. The Guardian, the Telegraph are arguably quite different in terms of their core audiences that you might think of people that read. We do see a lot of crossover between titles like that because I think, again, people are wise. They want to be informed. They want to know what's going on in the world. Our job is to try and make sure that people have access to that. I think there could be nothing worse than a world where we have, I think news publishers and magazine publishers will always still exist, but where everyone has to pay for everything. I think that becomes a bad place, and we end up in a world where you have the haves and have-nots. And I think everyone should have access to stuff that can help them make decisions, and that's really, really important.
Here. You've had your first here of the episode, Bryan. I give them out for guests that come up, I think, with really, really compelling points. I think actually just a reflection for me, and it's less of a question, just more of a remark on what you've described there. It's almost, thinking about it from an advertiser's perspective, it's almost the responsible thing to do as an advertiser, to look at and appreciate and understand, the wider impact of preserving quality journalism and preserving the premium web as you've described it. And actually there is a bit of a responsibility on advertisers themselves to look at the value of this. Is that something that sort of comes across in your work too, or your feeling towards it?
I think it definitely does. And we have lots of conversations with advertisers, with their agencies as well. And there's two bits to that. One, there is a societal part, which is absolutely, we want to make sure that continues. The second part is having a media ecosystem that works for them. What you don't want to do in media, as we've moved into an age of a lot of platform marketing, where scale and efficiencies and outcomes are really easy to achieve through things like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. That's become really important, because it makes a marketer's job has never been so more complicated, but these platforms make it really simple. So that's what we want to try and do through Ozone. We want to try and compete for some of those budgets that would never ever normally come into publishing, and help bring some of that here. I think the interesting bit is, so when we first started the business, we talked a lot about that responsibility. We talked a lot about it's the right thing to do. Going back to what we started this conversation about, the kind of responsibility. I think that's a fair ask. I don't think we should put the onus on advertisers, because why should they? Why they have a business that they have to look after themselves. They're responsible for their bottom line. They're responsible and have to kind of report back to their shareholders. It's our job, it's our industry's job to make sure that we are delivering the results that make a difference to their bottom line. And that way, if we can prove that, so a lot of the work that we are doing just now is to make sure that we can help give advertisers and their agencies the ammunition to be able to invest more. It used to be back in the day, I think, when even in my print days of the print sector was massive. It was one of the biggest advertising sectors in the country, but just behind TV. And now I think it's about 6% of total advertising spend or something like that. I might have got that number wrong, but someone else out there would know better than me. But it's definitely nowhere near where it was. And you argue that you've still got the audience there. You've still got people wanting all that content. We should be investing in it. So I think that the balance is there. I think we can harp on as much as we want about the responsibility. And I think there's a lot of brands out there that look at that and go, yes, we should be doing more. But if you're the person that's tasked with delivering more sales of pairs of shoes, that will very quickly fall down your checklist. So we want to be able to do that, but also reinforce that, if that makes sense. So we will give them the results, but also make them feel good about doing it.
Fantastic. It's a yeah, we need to present the win-win situation of both doing the right thing, but equally doing the commercially.
Absolutely. And then, just to jump in there, I mean, that's some of the stuff that we've seen at Ozone, which is particularly around some of the work we've done on sustainability and stuff like that, which is when we started our sustainability journey 3 years ago, we've got a program called EcoZone, which is all about engineering and kind of measurement of carbon emissions. I'll be really honest, we started off with two separate work streams. One was thinking about what we might do for sustainability. The other one was thinking about how we save costs. Mm-hmm. And then very quickly you go, the two are the same. You cut down your costs, and our biggest, about 60% of our carbon emissions come from our server usage. Mm-hmm. If you can combine those two things together, you have a win-win. You have a business win in terms of lower costs, and you have a business win in terms of a more sustainable business. And it's actually really that. I was hoping we might get into that a bit more. I think we're going to run out of time. But it's one of those things that you just look at that and you go, actually, being really honest about it, we weren't necessarily starting out on a sustainability streak with that, but we are now on a sustainability streak because of it, because every action that we take is helping make that supply more greener.
Which I think is a definite starting point for another episode, Brian, if you've enjoyed yourself, and I can snaffle you for another one. I think, but it's a very well made point, and the idea that I think even just changing perhaps within the political atmosphere that we find ourselves in, if you like, the ESG backlash that's gone on over the course of the last year or so, the changing of our language around sustainability to not necessarily consider it in the way that we did before, but to think about business efficiency and thinking about cost saving and thinking about future proofing and risk aversion. So I think absolutely agree with you on all of those fronts. We are now going to have to conclude with the magic wand questions. So let me throw that at you, Brian. Brian, I'm fascinated to see what you're going to do with this, actually, on the basis of our conversation. But if I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world right now, what would that one thing be?
Do you know what? This actually, and this is not deliberate because we didn't nearly get to this, but it's a bit of a segue from what we were just talking about there. I would love to create some kind of, and I'm going to mildly swear, bullshit barometer to align what people say about things that, like purpose, ESG principles, that basically would uncover the truth, that would tell people that actually they do actually genuinely care about this, or are they just jumping on a fad? I think I get really frustrated because I think working for a business where we have got a lot of purpose, when I hear people saying the same thing that we talk about, and I'm like, well, do you really care about it? Are you? If you really cared about it, why weren't you doing this 5 years ago? Why is that now your narrative? Why is that now your story? It's because arguably maybe our business has had some success that you want to have a part of. So I would love to be able to kind of go, is this something that is true? Is this something that is reactive to a fad or something that's very topical? Actually, I shouldn't say a fad, but something that's very topical. But because we've seen it in our industry, like when the sustainability stuff came around, everyone was asking us questions about what you're doing, what's your sustainability program, blah, blah, blah. That is great, actually, because it makes people go, if I've not thought about it, I better start thinking about it. And there's loads of industry initiatives like Add Net Zero, etc., which are driving people to make more conscious decisions. I would, in order to make those things work, they tend to have to be standardized. And sometimes that standardization means that they're very easy to achieve. And you go, is it a tick box exercise or something else? So I would love to create some kind of bullshit barometer that basically sees through all of that and goes, yes, this is true. Or on a scale, it gives they're 3 out of 10 on that, or they're a 7 out of 10, because that is aligned. So that would be my magic wand moment. Don't know how it would happen. I'm sure ChatGPT would probably tell me a way to make that happen.
Well, Brian, what a brilliant suggestion, and it rings true to certainly some of the things that we're working on ourselves. And I think there's a lot to be said from, you alluded to it in in your suggestion that actually it comes from long-term implementation of that value, and there being clearly difficult decisions that have had to be made in order to retain that position. Those for me are the two criteria, because if you can see that timeline and you can see that actually there were difficult decisions that were made as a business in order to retain that value, that's authenticity to me. It's not just when it's easy, you do it when it's difficult. And I think even like, you look at a good example would be BP and their rollback on all things renewables over the course of the last sort of 6 months or so. And you just look at that, and I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that that value or that principle that was suggested to be at the heart of the organization has shown to not be, in the fact that they've decided to do what they've done.
I guess the flip side of that is we've seen a lot of other organizations and brands do the opposite. So when a lot of this stuff's been rolled back, there's definitely been a lot that I've been reading about that have doubled down on their efforts, particularly around things like D&I, sustainability, etc. And I think that is where you get a bit of a heart moment there with those brands. You think, yes, you do what you do because that is really intrinsic to your business.
Bryan, I love the fact that you've turned it and finished it on a positive note. I couldn't agree more, and I think it's brilliant. It's comforting and encouraging to see that at play. But Bryan, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. That was a whistle-stop tour, but a really fascinating conversation. And for any of our listeners and viewers out there that are interested in finding out about the great work that Ozone are doing, we'll obviously link to various resources. But thanks again for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlie.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Bryan Scott, Chief Marketing Officer at Ozone, for joining me for today's show. In this episode, we examined the growing concerns among news publishers and broadcasters regarding advertising blacklists. We discussed how these blacklists, intended to protect brand safety, may inadvertently defund legitimate news outlets and impact journalistic independence. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.